folks. Welcome. We have Michael with us here, and it's a pleasure to have him. And so I can kick it off with a quick introduction about me and Spendflo, and then dive into a couple of questions we have for Michael. So I'm Sid. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Spendflo. At Spendflo, we help companies buy, manage, and secure all of their SaaS spends with guaranteed savings. We started the company about 3 years ago now, and we've been managing over $500 million in SaaS spend across our customers and over 30,000 different contracts. So along the way, we get to the best part of my job is to speak to folks like Michael, right? And I like to kick it off with a quick question, Michael. What are some experiences that shaped your career in finance, right? There must be something that actually triggered, hey, listen, I'm going to become the president and CFO of Typeform one day, and this is how I'm going to get here.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Sid. There have been lots of those experiences. I think with anything, it's been a journey. So I'll talk about one or two, and then we can go from there. I started my career in investment banking. So I did the M&A analyst program for a couple of years at Morgan Stanley in New York. And, I came in and there was a lot for me to learn. And that was exciting for me. There was plenty I had to dig into around how do you build a model and all the rest of it. And after my 2 years there, I would say I was generally feeling pretty good. I've started to figure this out. I understand how the financials work. And I made the move after 2 years from investment banking to private equity and growth equity. And I remember moving over to the buy side. And I remember sitting in one of my first meetings where, I was working on a deal and I built the model and I knew the financials inside and out. And somebody at the table turned to me and said, well, what do you think about the business? And I thought to myself, hang on a second, I'm wholly unprepared for this. I thought it was going to be about revenue growth and operating leverage and margins. And I don't know what I think about the business. And so that began for me a very interesting journey of, hey, to really be good at this, to really figure this out, it's not just about the numbers. The numbers are a part of the story. How do you figure out the business? I think another sort of bit for me as I started to progress in my career, and I worked in private equity, growth equity for about 10 years, I then looked around and I thought long and hard about what part of the job I enjoyed the most. And I think getting to be an investor, there's so many different parts to the job. You get to look at new companies, you get to figure out how to value them, you get to think about structure, you get to work with them after you make the investment. And the one that I kept coming back to when I thought about what day of the week did I enjoy the most, where did I have the most fun, it was getting to spend time with the portfolio companies themselves, and sit in the room with the operating team and hear how they thought about things. Because I think the secret I felt like I was carrying around with me as an investor was that I could sit in a room with the best of them and say, hey, this company is only growing 30, 40%, it needs to grow 50%. But if someone had asked me how to do it, I wouldn't have had any idea how to tell them to go do it. And I think another big part of it for me is once I really understood that part of the business and how businesses worked, the itch I was to go be a part of it and really try and execute on those sorts of things. And it's now been six years for me on the operating side, and I'm having a ton of fun doing it.
That's awesome. I think one of the key parts of this is as soon as you become an investor and then you transition into an operating role, and especially for someone like you, where your career path has been it's been amazing, right? And in that journey, one of the things that I like to ask is, do you think you're a natural leader, or is it something that you really consciously worked on?
Well, first of all, I always enjoy when I get to speak to somebody like you who's a founder, and I think you've had an incredible career trajectory, and I get really excited about what you're doing. But in terms of me, I have to work on it. Like, I'll give you an example. One of the things that I've done a bit of is get up in front of the company and speak at internal events, at all hands meetings. And a lot of it has been to talk about the business and where we're going and what our strategy is and how we're performing. And I will tell you that I spend a lot of time preparing, practicing for these sorts of things. So I think, when it comes to people who are leaders come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. I think for me, a lot of it has been about how do you really practice and prepare? I'm a big believer in, as a leader, demonstrating to the people that I get to work with that what we're doing is important, that I want to spend the time and show them that it's important by, having the right set of materials, having thought through what the messages we're going to say. And so for me, it's been something I've had to work at, but it's been a fun kind of work. It hasn't been one of those things where I dread doing it, but it's been real work.
Do you think like you've had a degree of impatience in your career so far? Like I know you went from investment banking to the buy side and then to the CFO and now to the president and the CFO. Like, do you think like you're constantly working on hey, I have this itch to scratch, so I want to go scratch that itch? Like, is that something that you've constantly thought about, or no? Like you're like, hey, I've already had this planned out, and this is like what it's going to look like.
Yeah, it's I don't know if it's impatience or not. What I've found for myself is I've enjoyed the journey because it's helped me understand, what I like to do and where I should end up. And so for me, I think if I go back to the beginning of my career,
Yeah.
I'm not sure I ever would have envisioned myself sitting in this seat. But having had some different experiences, I think it's allowed me to learn, what are the things I enjoy? What are the things I don't? And shape this role for myself. The other thing I'd say is I think getting to work at companies like, Typeform, where I am today, and these companies and the growth and scale of space doing really interesting technology things is, I think all of us have to be running around sometimes like our hair is on fire. And so, where my impatience comes from, if I have impatience, isn't necessarily my own personal impatience. It's really looking at the opportunity for us as a company and saying, let's go and let's go faster. And how do we win? And all these sorts of things. Because, with a company like ours, we're in the data collection business. I'm sure many of the folks who are listening to this have used a Typeform at some point, whether you know it or not, a form, a quiz, a survey. There is such an enormous opportunity today around data collection, particularly in the world that we live in, where cookies are changing and it's about first-party data and zero-party data. And so I think where my impatience comes from a lot of times is, how do we as a company get there faster?
Got it. And it actually leads to the business part of this interview, right? Which is like, tell us a little bit more about Typeform. I know most people already know about it, but you actually, when we were catching up before, you had a very interesting roadmap for what Typeform is actually building towards, right? So what is Typeform actually building towards? And followed up by, what are some top priorities that you have for the business as the president and the CFO?
Yeah. So, I joined Typeform a little over 6 months ago now, and I was incredibly excited to get the chance to join Typeform because it's obviously a product that I've used before. And as I was telling you, Sid, it's a product a lot of people love. And I think getting to work in this space, when you're wearing the t-shirt and somebody actually comes up and says to you, hey, do you work at that company? I love the product. It is a really special thing, and we can talk about how that ties into the PLG motion and how that ties into virality and all the rest of it. But for me, that got me really excited. And Typeform's roots, its history, if you go back to the beginning about 12 years ago, it really came from a design-driven approach to thinking about surveys. And when we talk about design, a lot of it is thinking about how the user is going to interact with the surveys. So there are a lot of tools out there. I'm sure plenty of us have had experience where the tools that we're using, feel designed to extract information out of us in not particularly a pleasant way, or in a way where they haven't really thought through what that user experience is going to be like. And where Typeform has differentiated itself is really thinking about the user, building a beautifully designed experience that also allows the creator to do some really neat things. And so it's been a business that has worked across verticals, across geographies, across use cases in an incredibly horizontal way. And I think as we move forward, we've got opportunities to think a little bit more vertically about where we go and what we do, really think about how do we solve that person's challenge? How do we speak to the use case? We've also got opportunities with some other products and other opportunities. So for instance, I think a lot of people are probably familiar with the Typeform product.
Yeah.
We've got a product called Video Ask, which is a video-based data collection tool, where the idea being, rather than filling out a survey, you can do a short video, either to convey or collect data back from a user. Super interesting. We've got something still in early stages where we're in sort of private beta around a product called Formless, where we're
Nice.
taking generative AI and we're applying it to what we're doing in this data collection space. Really, really interesting. I would encourage people to take a look at that. So I think where this goes, there's so much opportunity still ahead of us. And I think given the platform that we have, given the customer base that we have, we're excited about where we can go.
That's awesome. And so especially for a business like Typeform, where there's inherent virality built into the business, honestly, every time I reference Typeform to my product managers or designers, now they're kind of annoyed with me because of like how much I reference it. But nonetheless, like, what are some priorities that you have, right, as the president and CFO coming into the business for 2024 for the business? Like, what are like the top three things that you're worried about, or like what you're focused on?
Yeah, it ties a little bit to my approach to, joining a business. So one of my approaches to joining a business is I am not a big believer in 30, 60, 90
Yeah.
day plans, because I think for a lot of us, and I find myself saying this about more and more roles, in order to be successful, we really have to understand the business and how the business works. And so for me, when I joined Typeform, a lot of my focus was, how do I understand the business and how do we understand the business? And so,
Mm,
a lot of my initial priority, obviously, some of this was personal, but then to bring it back to the organization and share it with the organization, which is, how does the business really work? How should we think about it? What are the key drivers? So one of my priorities has been helping the entire organization really have the context about where we are and where we're going to make a lot of the right decisions.
mm.
I think a second piece of it was helping us as a company, think hard about, our plan, our strategy, where we're going. And then at the moment, we're now getting into budget season, which I'm sure we
Yeah.
can talk a lot about, and how we think about gearing up for 2024.
Yeah. And we just kicked it off, but in the conversation, folks, please feel free to like put in any questions you need in the Q&A section. Michael and I will happy to like take them. So I mean, Michael, the next question I have was, in terms of like the metrics that you look at to measure the health of the business, primarily because again, because of Typeform multiple products, multiple channels, like I'm guessing customer lifetime value, CAC, there's a bunch of these usual metrics that you look at, but what's something that you look for beyond those usual? Like, is there something that you look for to measure the health of the business, and things that you kind of know at the top of your head?
Yeah. I'll share with you a little bit of the inside, how I've been thinking
Yeah.
and the conversations we've been having. So, I will approach this a little bit differently, and rather than jump right into the metric, what I've tried to do is think along the lines of the customer journey. So like,
Okay.
one of the things I keep coming back to in conversations is, it's about the customer, it's about the customer, it's about the customer. So when I think about metrics, the way we've been having the conversation internally is, we have a lot of metrics around when the customer comes into the funnel. So all those funnel metrics from top of funnel to the point at which they convert. But there's a whole, how do we go out and acquire the customer? There's a whole bit around when the customer is with us. What does that look like? How are they using us? Are they growing? Are they expanding? All those sorts of metrics. And then obviously there's the end of the life cycle, which is when they depart. And what my experience has been now at a few different companies is, I find companies are good at really digging into one or maybe two, but I haven't seen companies always dig into all of them, where, somebody says, hey, we've got a great funnel, we've got to be all over the funnel. And the focus is on the funnel, the funnel, and the funnel. And when you start to dig into, well, how productive are your users when they're with you? And every month, are they using you more or less than they were the previous month? It starts to fall down. Or, folks can be very focused on retention and churn and these sorts of metrics. But if you go back to the other side, well, tell me about new customers and how they're coming in. So a lot of what I've been trying to do is take that customer-focused approach and make sure we've got the right metrics across the journey so that we're not missing anything. Like, the great thing about Typeform, because the virality, as you referenced, we've got lots of people at the top of the funnel, and there's so much to figure out. But the great thing about Typeform too is we've got a ton of customers who love using the products, who are with us. We got to focus there as well. And so it's making sure we've got all of those different bases covered with the right set of metrics. I'm happy to go into a little bit more detail if you're helpful, but really trying to make sure we follow that journey. And I would just call out for folks, really have a think about whether at every stage you've got the right metrics to know how those customers are performing for you.
Do you, for you, is there like, you have the funnel and then you have like post acquisition, like what's the customer health look like, all of that, the retention metrics in there as well. As the president and CFO, and when you're talking to the CEO and you're talking to like your executive team, do you have a tendency to like kind of push everybody to think about, hey, okay, great, like you have to look at it customer first, but is there specific numbers or specific metrics or any specific things that you like to look at apart from like, I mean, it can be the regular SaaS metrics, but like, is there something else that's specific?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's necessarily something else specific. I wish I had,
Yeah.
magic metric that nobody else knows about. I think a lot of it is the stuff that we talk about, but it's the way we try and do it. So when it comes to, thinking about the customers we're bringing on, of course, we're looking at, customer acquisition cost and understanding lifetime values. And of course, we're understanding the different phases of the funnel, and we're thinking about activation, and we're thinking about conversion, and we're thinking about all these things. I think a lot of it has been, as an example, are we thinking about them for the right group of people? So, a lot of times organizations will look at overall metrics and they'll say this metric is up or down, and that's what it is. I think one of the questions we've been having a lot of discussions about is, are we really thinking about the right cohort, the right group? And you can define that any number of ways. You can define it geographically, you can define it by vertical, by use case, by size, all sorts, but really trying to dig into that level. And I think, one of the things that I've been spending a lot of time looking at, and maybe this is because, I've been pushing probably a bit beyond the bounds of finance, is, how are our customers using us? I would just say that, like, another observation I would have is that, organizations that I've worked for, I think are really good at that high level, here's what we do, really good at line numbers, but sometimes lose the in-between bit. And I think better understanding, why are our customers using us? For what? How? It ties so much more closely to the numbers, because we can talk about things like retention rates, but if we don't understand whether our product is a one and done product or our product is you turn it on and you never turn it off, how do you put retention rates in context? So I guess all I would say on this one is, I think it's about really finding those segments that you want to target and who that customer profile is. And I think the other bit is, then trying to tie everything around use case, persona, you name it, into those financial metrics that you're tracking.
And it's actually fascinating that you say that, because I mean, like, we deal with it every day, and like, it's something that I look at. Like, I spend like an hour every day looking at like calls, just call recordings, and then I spend an hour every day looking at like full story or like MS Clarity recordings of how the customer is actually using the product, and then tying it back to the metrics. But like, we're not at that stage where I can start segmenting them. But like, I feel I feel like that just knowing the answer to that, you don't need a 30, 60, 90-day plan. You just need to do this, and you kind of like,
but I think you need to do it. And I think the challenge, as we all know, is as businesses grow, it feels harder to do that kind of thing, right? It feels harder to listen to the sales call recording. It feels harder to, but I think one of the things I've tried to carve out time for is to continue to do it, right? Like, sometimes I don't know if, I'm doing the right thing, or I'm a bit of a crazy person, but, how do you go deep into that data so you see it? And of course, I'm not, as one individual, going to be able to cover everything, but what it allows me to do is be able to direct where we want to invest our efforts around figuring this thing out, or building that process, or whatever it may be, because you've got that base level of understanding.
It gives you organizational context to actually make those decisions as well, to a large degree, right? Like, and so, like, are there like any habits, like, from like you when you came on board as the CFO and the president? What are some habits that you kind of said, hey, great, like, these are some things that I'm going to continue doing? Like you mentioned, right? Like, you kind of segment some time out to listen to those sales calls. Is there something else that you do that maybe could be helpful for the audience here?
Yeah, there are a few things that probably come to mind. One is, I am a big believer in tracing everything back down to source documentation. And so, what I mean by that is, it's great to go into your ERP. It's great to go into Looker, whatever tool you use, and say, okay, this is MRR or ARR for the month. But what I've really tried to do is say, okay, how do we trace that back, right? So where is MRR? Where is that calculation coming from? Oh, okay, well, it's coming from our billing or subscription tool. Okay, I've got that. Where's that information coming from? Well, it's happening once it hits, Salesforce. Okay, let's trace that back. Okay, within Salesforce, where does the underlying customer agreement live? Order form. Okay, it's here. And again, it's impossible to do it for everything, but I think by finding that, it gives you aha moments about, there's a thing here, or I can see why this is complicated, or I just found that when digging into certain processes, having done that work, and I'm far from having completed all of it, but having started to poke around in those areas, it gives you a better sense for how things work, because otherwise you can have a conversation which is, hey, the process from, customer raising hand, order form signed to provisioning is broken. Great. If that's all you can go say to somebody it's broken, go fix it. But if you've seen how it works, you can guide them, you can give them a sense, you can point them in the right direction. And to your question around being a leader, I think that's a lot of where it comes from, having done some of that work so you can be helpful to somebody. And it's not just what I've seen before, but hey, I've dug into some of this stuff too, and let's figure out how we do it together. So that has been a big piece of it for me. Maybe I'll pause there. And
I think when we were catching up before, you kind of alluded to this, right? That you want context, or you want information to be shared to everybody within the org, so that a lot of the cross-functional challenges that you face can get solved for. Do you want to just dive into that? Because I found it really fascinating when you said that, and I want to kind of replicate that inside Spendflo. So I wanna deep dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll share with you my philosophy. I'll share with you a smaller example, and then we can talk about what we're doing more at scale. So my philosophy is very much that when people have disagreements over business issues, the overwhelming majority of time, it's because they have different assumptions, or they have different data, or they have different context. And so, based on my experience, one of the things that I've been very passionate about is how do we make sure we have the same set of facts in front of us? Because amazingly, when you have the same set of facts in front of you, it turns out that you don't get blocked nearly as often, and you're not constantly bumping into each other. And so I'll give you a small example first. When I joined Typeform, one of the things that we did is we were sitting around in one of my first leadership team meetings with a group, and people are talking, and somebody says something about budget. And, we've all been in this meeting, all eyes turned to me. Michael, it's a budget question. What do you think? And I said, hey, I want to use this as an opportunity here. I think the reason you're all looking at me is because I'm the finance person, and I completely get that. But I think the reason you're looking at me as the finance person is because you think I know something that you all don't. And so let me share with you what I know. Here's the budget. Here's how we're trending against budget. Here's some of the competing asks that have been put forward. Here's where we would, sit if we did some or all of them. How do you all feel about it? And I think it's in sharing that, because what's really interesting, that then became not my decision, but the team's decision, number one. Number two, I found the team got to the exact same place that I would have gotten to, but the team was able to do it as a team instead of by me saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. And it allows people to think more critically better next time we get into one of those conversations. Now, at scale, it's a little bit different because you're not always sitting in the room doing it. So what I've been trying to do, we've had a number of all hands meetings since I've joined. We've had a company event where we've all gotten together, is give people the key pieces of context. And the analogy I used at one of our get-togethers, which probably isn't a perfect analogy, is, in a sporting match, we can put everybody out in the field, and as a coach or manager, I can try and tell everybody, or you or any of us as leaders, what to do step by step. Hey, you want to take 3 steps in this direction, that person's going to take 4 steps there, you want to turn around, you want to kick the ball, whatever it may be. Or you can explain the objective of the game in the context, and you can say, you now know what you need to know, go figure it out. And so what I've tried to do at Typeform and in other organizations is, how do you give people that context, right? Where are we trying to go? Are we clear on the goal? How high up on the mountain are we trying to climb? Where are we today? Okay, so now we know how far we have to go. Are these big jumps we need to make? Or are they smaller? Here's some examples of some of the areas you might want to look. And what I found is when you start to give organizations that context, the light bulb starts to go off, and you get to the position where you can empower people to go do what they need to do, because now everybody gets it. Right now, everybody knows what the game is they're playing. They get the objective. Let everyone go figure it out, because we have great people. What I found at Typeform, we have great people. I think what we're continuing to try and do is how do we make sure we're all running in that same direction and clearing the goal, because that's when the magic happens.
And I'm curious, right? Like, how do you practice this as well? Is there any like things that you practice, like hey, before a meeting, after a meeting? Is that something that you do weekly? Is there like rituals that you've kind of that's kind of work? Maybe not at Typeform, or at your past organizations where this is actually some rituals that might have actually worked for this.
Yeah, I think rituals around making sure that we share information consistently. Like one of the things I've found is that so far I've gotten a lot of feedback, good, bad, and ugly. One of the pieces of feedback I've never gotten is communicate less. Stop sharing this sort of stuff with us. And so I think it's making sure that it's consistent, because when you say something once, I think some people pick it up. Some people, you've got to say it over and over again. So what I've tried to do is create consistency to the messages. The other thing I've tried to do is help people build. Like, I'll give you another example on these rituals is, how do you make sure we're all speaking the same language? And I think as finance people, one of the things that we forget is that while finance is not that complicated, sometimes we make it sound like it is. And so, I found power in just explaining what ARR is, right? It's okay to stop and explain what ARR is, and not in a way where you say, hey, here's what ARR stands for, but in a way where you break down how it's calculated. Look, it's annualized. Okay, well, now we're at monthly. Well, how do you get to that monthly number? Well, you take the number of customers that we have and you take the amount of money they're paying you that month. Aha. And it's been great because you see people get, aha, well, now I get it. Now that thing you're talking about doesn't sound so foreign or sound so scary. I get it. And so I think another big ritual of mine has been, how do you bring more people under the tent as it relates to these things? And I'll pause in a moment so you can redirect me. But I'll share another sort of learning of mine as it relates to this stuff. When I started on the operating side, and you step into a seat and you are the CFO of an organization, one of the things that's different, I guess, from my investing experience is there's now only one of you. There's only one of you in that role. When you work in an investment firm or a bank, there are lots of investors, there are lots of bankers. You now sit in a position where you're the only one person. And so, one of the things that I think initially I tended to do was, well, I'm that person, I want to make sure I have the answers. And if anyone, has a question, they come to me. When you flip that around, it's a really powerful thing, which is, this isn't information to be guarded, and this isn't information to be kept. This is information to be shared. It's helpful to the company to understand how they're doing. And if the information sharing isn't going the right way, maybe it's because you as the CFO, you as the person, aren't explaining it the right way or aren't focused on the right things. So I think that's been another big learning for me is, it's not just about knowing the answers. It's not just about knowing the numbers inside and out. It's not just about you coming to me with a question and me being able to say to you, hey, Sid, here's your answer. How do I make sure you have that information? And it's a little bit scary because you think to yourself, my goodness, if everybody else has that information, what am I good for anymore? But it's an incredible thing.
And actually leads to my next point as well, which is something that I've been religiously following in the last like 8 or 9 months or so. All our leaders essentially have like an internal like kind of Twitter thread on Slack where they post their priorities for the week. And like I send out like a weekly newsletter to the team on what's going on, what's the priorities, what did we do last week, and I share like the monthly investor update with our entire team as well. Like at least in our scale, that kind of we keep doing that, but it's something that's helpful and something that I would highly recommend folks to just follow, because now everybody's dealing in the same context. It's not on like the CFO or the CEO to kind of go figure it out. It's actually on, hey, we're a team. Let's go figure it out together, right? Like just like that's a very key point. It took me a while to figure it out as well. So it's
Yeah,
actually a real
I
testament.
think for all of us, it's something that we learn. I mean, your question
Mm,
around, how do you think about yourself as a natural leader? This is another thing that for me has been learned. I mean, it sounds like for you a little bit
yeah,
too.
yeah,
You realize that sharing information where you're not the one who kind of
yeah,
owns, controls it. I think initially it feels like, hey, maybe it makes me a little bit less important. You
yeah.
realize what it can do for the organization. And so I think this has been a big push of mine, which is how do we share
Mm,
it with the organization and how do we share it with them in a way that they can use? And so a lot of this has been about building up, and a lot of this has been about building this information up. Whereas I've talked about with you, it just isn't about the financials. I think one of the things
no, yeah,
this whole CFO role has evolved is it's about more than the financials these days. And I think other
yeah.
than sitting in your position, Sid, as CEO, I think the CFO seat has potentially the next best view of what's happening across the company. And it doesn't mean that they have all the answers. It doesn't mean they know how to go
No.
build product. It doesn't mean they know how to go close a sale. But it does give them a unique point of view, again, to be shared with the rest of the company that
Mm.
I've tried to leverage as best I can.
It's actually like the analogy I use is the CFO has moved from the referee to the point guard now. They're actually directing the data and honestly the resources to the right hands, right? Like to go make those decisions. And one of the and information is the best type of fuel, right, inside an organization. And like the best CFOs know like okay, like pass it along to everybody that you think it's actually needed for to make a
Yes.
decision.
Yes.
Um, and actually, I actually moved into my next question, which is you're not just the CFO, but you're also the president and the CFO of Typeform. What does that actually encompass, right? And how has that actually evolved for you as well?
Yeah. So when I joined Typeform, I think it was one of our all hands, and I was introducing myself, and I
Yeah.
said, hey, I'm Michael, and I think before I could say anything more, the question popped up, which is, what is a president and CFO? I said, great, this is great. We'll handle this right out of the gate. The reason why, and this is now the second role I've been in, where it's
Hmm.
been president and CFO. Where this came about for me was not, hey, I let's add another title, and I genuinely believe that. Where it came from was the role has become broader, and I
Mm,
think the role that I'm playing has become broader. So to speak about Typeform for a moment, what I oversee is the finance team. I oversee our legal team. I oversee our
mm,
strategy and ops team, and I oversee our data team. And what I've
mm,
found is when I've served as CFO, people look at you as the finance person. So, hey, if there's a dollar sign or a euro sign or pound sign in front of it, you're the finance person. What do you think? They don't think about you as a business person. And one of the things,
mm.
again, that I feel very passionately about is to be successful, all of us as leaders need to understand the business inside and out. And my role here at Typeform is not just to think about the financials. My role here is not to say, this is what our revenue was, this is what our profit was, the end. My role is to help the organization be smarter, make better decisions, have access to more data, all those sorts of things. And so the idea was to help sort of say, hey, it's about more than just the finance side of things. And I've tried to be
Mm.
intentional about it. When, it's all hands updates, it's not financial updates, it's business updates, exactly for this reason. And I think the more we can get all of us to think that way, that, it's
Yeah.
bigger than just finance, but it's more about the business. It's been really useful for me, and it's allowed me to have a bigger impact at organizations than I otherwise would have been able to have.
That's actually really smart. Like, I think unknowingly, unconsciously, a lot of CFOs kind of already play that role, but they just haven't necessarily figured out how to position it or how to actually talk about it internally and externally. Because change management, like, hey, like the CFOs always, like always looked at like you said, dollar euro sign. That's where he comes in. This is actually really smart. Thank you for covering that. And actually, this is my next question, primarily because the president and the CFO uh, you need to assemble a team that can actually go tackle these priorities. How do you actually think about it when you join Typeform or your previous orgs? Um, what's your strategy or what's your thought process on building and creating an org that will scale with you?
Yeah. So a few things. The first is that the organizational structure should reflect what you want to do. So,
Mm,
I think one of the things where I've tried to push myself, and I certainly haven't always gotten it right, is what's our objective? Do we want to be the most data-driven business? Do we want to be the most financially savvy business? Do we,
mm,
is commercial contracting something that we need to nail, and so we're going to lean into legal? I think you've got to understand where the business is. So I'll tie this back to my earlier point, which is I don't like coming in with any preconceived notions about what this should look like, but my
mm,
idea is to come in and learn where we want to index so that we can then go from there. The next I would say would be, I do with my teams what I've just described, which is share with all of them the context and share with all
mm,
of them where we want to go. So, hey, we're going to come in and we're going to redesign process A, B, or C, or we're going to redesign deck A, B, or C. We're not going to do it just for the sake of it, but we're going to do it because we think we can drive tangible improvements. And here's where and here's why. And we do it, and then we build from there. I think as we go, that's been a pretty powerful way for me to get into organizations and help build them up. It doesn't mean that at times we haven't moved some of the pieces around. It doesn't mean that we haven't done some things differently. But idea for me has been similarly to my broader approach to things, which is get in, really understand what we're trying to do,
mm.
match the structure to the strategy of what our teams want to do, and
Yeah.
then bring people along on that journey. We want to build people up, and I think if you just give them the right context, they can go do it.
Yeah, and like I'm curious, what's like one interview question that you kind of always throw at every candidate? Like I always want to know, like what's that one interview question that you
Yeah.
throw around?
I will share with you my one interview question. My one interview question is, what do you think is people's biggest misperception of you?
Mm,
And I think it's an interesting one because people don't get asked it too often. And so you see some people have to really think about it on the spot. But it also speaks to self-awareness and understanding,
yeah.
who you are and how you can come off. And, I think for me, one of the people's biggest misperceptions about me is that particularly in a business setting, I can come off as very business focused. So focused
Uh,
on the numbers, focused on the metrics, focused on these sorts of things, and I will jump into it. And I don't always come off as, focused on the people and the relationship and the rest of it. And it's something that I've had to work at, but it's a misperception of me. It's something that I believe
mm,
people get wrong about me. And it gives you an insight into people that I found really useful and interesting when having interviews.
that's actually like I'm gonna definitely copy that. Actually, something that I ask as well is like I ask about like what they think about their sibling and what the sibling actually thinks about them, or like a friend thinks about them. That also is like a notion of what self-awareness to a large degree, because that's what I mean when I'm trying to like get to as well, right? Like but it's always fascinating
Yes.
what those interview questions are. The Do you have any tips for folks over here, especially because the president and CFO, and in that role, one of the biggest pieces of that role is actually working with the CEO and also working with your board. So, any tips for how you set expectations with both the CEO and the board? Any tips for how you actually keep operating in the rhythm that you wanna set, right? Like it's something that you don't want to be forced into. You want to set that
Yeah.
rhythm as
Yeah.
well. So, any tips for the for folks here?
Yeah. I'll share the tips. Again, I wish I had something that was, no one had thought of before. But first thing I do is I ask. So when I join a company, I ask. When I've joined my past few organizations, the question to the CEO founder has been, "Hey, where are we in terms of relationship with the board? Where do we want to be? What's working? What isn't?"
Mm,
And I have the same conversation with our board members. And it's been helpful. I'll give you a example from recent conversations. When I was talking to board members, one of the things that came up consistently is board deck is very long. It's just very long. It's hard to get through it. But you know what? That's a very valuable piece of feedback to get. The second thing I would say is then just set expectations very clearly. Like what I find sometimes in these situations, and I think this is exactly the heart of your question. When you've got the board, when you've got the CEO,
yeah.
I think sometimes each will look at the other and look to say, okay, well, board, you said how you want a board meeting to go, and the board will say to the CEO, hey, CEO, you tell us how. And I think sometimes the role of someone in this position that someone like myself would be to say, hey, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to do it. And again, open to feedback and you should weigh in. But by putting out a straw man, you allow people to react. And anytime you put something, it's easier to react than come up with, hey, how are we going to do it from scratch? And so I've tried to do that, which is to say, look, I've spoken to key stakeholders. I'll share with everybody the feedback I've gotten. Based on the feedback that we received, we're doing a lot of things right, but there are probably a few things we may want to do differently. Here's what we're going to do differently. Here's how we're going to do them. And then we stick through it. The last bit I'd say is communication. Like I am consistently surprised by in board interactions. It's not, how poor the communication is, but, it's just assuming things for granted. So I don't know, hey, there's some resolution that needs to be signed. Okay, and it gets docu-signed around to the board. They don't have any context, right? Hey, hang on a second, right? Like, put yourself in the shoes of a board member. If you were a board member and you got something that said put your signature on it, you probably want to know what it is. You probably want to understand why it was being sent to them. Where is this coming from? So that's been the other big piece, which is just, I think there are some people who'd say, Michael, why are you throwing yourself in the middle of all these things? What I'm trying to do is make sure that line of communication is really clear. Here's what we're doing, board. Here's why we're doing it. Here's what we're asking of you, the rest of it. And so those three things I would ask. I would, number two, set expectations and allow people to react as opposed to the other way. And I would really communicate not just the key business bits, but everything that comes around it. Hey, time for you, board, to sign the audit. Yes, you could read the 100-page, set of annual accounts yourself. Or, I can give you some of the highlights, or you should look at the following few pages because these are the ones that are going to be most useful. How do you do that? It just creates a better dynamic.
Two last questions before I let you go, right? And something I'm just waiting on any questions from the audience as well, any Q&A, let us know. But what's the advice that you have for someone trying to follow your career path, right? Like someone who's trying to say, hey, listen, Michael is who I actually want to, Michael's career is something that I want to replicate, and it's something that was an inspiration for me. What's some advice you have for them?
Yeah, the advice I have is to figure out what really matters to you. I'll share with you the two things that professionally really matter to me, which are going to sound simplistic, but they did take me a little while to arrive at. The first is, I realized that I really wanted to help a company grow. So, what was less interesting to me was coming into somebody's seat where I was told, hey, the person in front of you had it all correct, and please just do what he or she was doing, and everything will be fine. I really wanted to feel like I had helped grow, I had helped build a thing. I'm obvious of people like you, Sid, who are founders who've done that build from scratch. I come in a little bit later, but I think I want to be as much a part of that as possible. And the second thing is, I want to have an impact. And so for me, it was important to find an organization, find a role where I felt like I was able to have that impact. And so, my advice to people is to find out what those things are for you. And then once you have them, the path becomes a lot clearer. I mean, I could go into some other bits and pieces and say, I probably should have made the jump over to the operating side a little bit earlier. I can talk about how I very purposely joined, a very early stage company in my first operating role because, I thought it was important to really understand foundationally what it was to implement an ERP and what it was to build these processes from the ground up. There's a lot of good to that. I'm not sure it's necessarily the right path for everybody. So, there are a whole host of bits and pieces in there, but really I think it's about figuring out, what gets you excited and what are those 2 or 3 things for you, and then matching them to the opportunity that you go find.
Yeah, and on a personal note, I asked about professional rituals. Is that a personal habit that you follow? Personal habits that you follow that you recommend?
I don't know that I've got any personal habits that
don't say exercise. Everybody does it.
No, it's not. I don't know. I think it's about creating some space for other things. I mean, I can tell you as a parent, I found having kids very clarifying because, I found pre-kids, you could always do more and work and spend more time. I found that very clarifying. I'm not sure if there's a habit other than to make sure I find time for some other things and to make sure I get some reflection time. Like, I think all the stuff we do, you can fill every hour of every day and be constantly doing things. I think being able to pull back a little bit, like personally, professionally, but I don't know. I make sure I've got blocks of time where I can just dig in and
Yeah,
think. I know that's easier said than done. I know that's
that's
hard for
super
a lot
hard.
of us. Like,
Yeah.
right, when you're processing payroll or making sure that the payment run goes out, like, I know it's hard to do it, but I think the more we can all find that time, the better it served me.
And do you have like, especially going into 2024, like you're starting budgeting, you're starting annual planning very soon. Um, any thoughts on the market per se, and thoughts
Yeah,
or advice that you have for
yeah,
fellow finance and finance
yeah.
leaders?
I think we as finance people probably tend to be a little bit more balanced, and going into
Mm,
2024, my sense is that should probably serve us well. I
yeah.
remember when things were going crazy in 2020 and 2021, feeling like people are probably feeling a little bit too good. I think over the last little bit, I think people may have been feeling a little too bad too. So,
Yeah.
finding that balance going into 2024. I also would say, look out ahead. I'm always struck by the number of people in our world who say it's all about profitability. It's all about profitability. You got to get to profitability. There's nothing else. And you sort of say, okay, but am I having that liquidity event next week or next month, right? Like, are we going public
Mm,
next month? No. Now I realize if we were, yes, maybe profitability is going to be the most important metric, although there hasn't been a company that's gone public, right? But where are you going to be in a year or two or three, and how do you build to that? So I would just say, find the balance and look out a little bit farther. Like, one of the things we'll do is we'll build more than a 2024 plan, because we want to make sure we're looking out farther as well, so that we can take into account the entire picture.
that's awesome. Michael, I wanna close it off with any last thoughts as well. Like, I know we spoke about personal advice that you have for the audience, just like on the market as well. And I think I've honestly had a fantastic chat with you, just picking your brain. I'm gonna take away a lot of things, and hopefully try to replicate that within how I operate. Any closing thoughts that you have for folks?
No, I mean, hopefully you can hear
Yeah.
from how excited and passionate I am about this stuff. I imagine you all are too. Sid, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Michael. I had a blast, and I bet and folks can connect with you on LinkedIn, Twitter. Where can they find you, and where can they follow you as
LinkedIn
well?
is probably the best. Yeah, look for me
Yeah,
there, and happy to start a conversation.
awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for taking the time, and
Thanks a lot.
have a great day. Bye
You
bye.
too.